Welcome, everybody, to Books with Cooks,
a podcast for bookies and foodies.
Hi, I'm Jess.
And I'm Alex.
And we're two cousins
who are also best friends
who love to read.
Yeah.
And I love to cook.
And I cook to survive.
We'll be reviewing, analyzing,
sometimes overanalyzing,
and discussing the books we're currently reading, as well as new
and old
recipes from our kitchen to yours. By the way, we're real people
with real families.
So you may hear cats,
dogs,
birds,
babies,
and husbands.
So enjoy that bonus material. Now let's get booking
and have a tasty chat.
Before we get started, we want to include some trigger warnings. This book and the following discussion will include topics of racism, depression, suicide, death, gun violence, sexual content, and murder. So please be aware of that before you proceed.
Also, just be aware that there will be cursing and spoilers. So if that's something you're sensitive to, or if you haven't read the book yet, you may want to skip this episode and come back to it in the future. Hey, listeners, stick around after this episode for some bonus content. Hello, welcome back to Books with Cooks. We're snacking. Alex, what do you got for your snacks today?
All right, so today I do have some clementines, and then I have Snyder's honey mustard and onion pretzel pieces, which are addicting as hell. Yeah, they're really good.
Oh, you're a Schneider.
You're a Schneider. A Schneider. A Snyder. Is it Snyder or Schneider? I don't know. Doesn't matter.
I don't know, but I love that you're snacks. Your snacks are Schneiders.
Snacks are awesome. Schneiders. Schnack and Schneiders.
So I'm happy to report that I don't have a sugar-free Red Bull today.
Ooh, wow.
I know, I'm switching it up. I have a chai tea, which is organic. I get the chai tea from Amazon. It's pretty delish. I will put the link in our bio. And I am having it with some vanilla syrup, Tirani vanilla syrup, and it's actually vanilla bean, pretty delish. And some frothed oat milk. I like the Silk oat milk creamer. It's called the oatmeal cookie one, and it's pretty yummy. So I put that in there.
Okay.
And then I have some kettle chips.
Nice. So, very nice. Yeah. All right.
Snacking.
Snacky snack.
Snacking. So first the snacks, and what do we want to unpack? Anything we want to talk about today?
Anything we want to chat about? I figure we could go through our rating criteria since we are rating books on these episodes. Then, people can understand why we rate these books the way that we do.
Okay. All right. You want to go first?
Sure. All right. Sorry if you can hear Runley drinking in the background. All right. So I do rate on a 0 to 5 star criteria. So I'll start with the top. For 5, these books, in my opinion, are flawless, or at least nearly flawless. There might be some minor issues, but I don't feel that they detract from the reading experience. I generally loved it, and I would probably reread it. I would most likely recommend it. A 4-star book, has solid plot, solid characters, good writing, some minor flaws that I think do detract from the reading experience. So, for example, maybe there's a lull in the story, or it should have been, or it could have been a little bit shorter. Maybe it was a little predictable, or I felt frustrated with something in the book. But overall, I really liked it, and I might reread it, and I might recommend it. A 3-star book, I think, has a good plot and good characters, but just okay writing. I think that there's some writing issues that do detract from the reading experience. For example, the writing style, there might be tonal issues or editing issues, or maybe just doesn't feel overall original and could be predictable. Overall, I like a 3-star book. I enjoyed reading it, and I might reread it. It would depend on the plot and the characters for me for this one, and I might recommend it. Just depends on the book. A 2-star book would have a good to mediocre plot, probably flat characters, and mediocre or poor writing. I most likely did not enjoy reading this book, and I would not reread it. I most likely would not recommend it. 1 star, I would think, has poor plot, flat characters, poor writing. Overall, I hated the book, and I would not reread it. And then a 0 star for me just means that I didn't finish it, either because I hated it or I just felt no desire to keep reading it. Maybe it just wasn't the book for me. So it might be an okay book. It's just not the book for me. So there you
Okay.
have it. How about you, Jess?
Well, a 5 star for me is a book that I absolutely love. Even if it's imperfect, if it's something that's like a fun joy ride, something that I would be recommending to everyone and their mother, something that I would just absolutely love, like Fourth Wing, for example, that I have a book hanging over and I can't seem to read something that is curing it. That's a 5 star for me. A 4.5 is something that I would reread, maybe some minor flaws. Same thing with a 4. I would reread it, but maybe there's some plot inconsistencies or other issues or personal things for me that I just didn't like about the content or the writing. 3.5 or lower, I'm just going to group that all together and tell you that I wouldn't reread any of those. It depends on if it's a 1, I hate it, or like a DNF, I just didn't finish it, I couldn't finish it. But it really just depends on my level of distaste for the book or the inconsistencies or major flaws, for where I would group it anywhere from a 3.5 and lower. So that's my rating for you.
Damn, okay.
Yeah. I'm a little ruthless when 3.5 to 1 go down. So it depends. Like I gave Starts With Us, as you know, a 1.5, and I feel like I was a little generous maybe because I felt
Yeah.
bad. But yeah, I didn't feel bad with the Lucy scorebook. I had said that I gave that, I think, 0 stars or a 1. I don't even remember. But I didn't finish that book, so not my
Yeah.
favorite. So that just
Yeah.
gives you a glimpse of where my ratings come from.
Yeah. And just so you guys can understand a little bit, why we rate the books the way that we do. All right. So
Yeah.
let's get into it.
Okay, it's time for the word of the day. Remember that we encourage our listeners to use these words in your daily conversations and with us on our socials. Stay tuned at the end of this episode when we will give out our Sassy Spatula Award to whoever correctly uses the word in conversation during the previous episode. Each word of the day will come from the Word a Day Vocabulary Workbook by Francine Puckley, or Franny the Pucks. Follow the link in bio to get a copy for yourself.
Without further ado, today's word of the day is
Discombobulate, spelled Discombobulate, pronounced discombobulate. It is a verb that is defined as to confuse or place in an awkward predicament, utterly disconcerted. For example, the frenzied pace of 8 hours on the trading floor has left me utterly discombobulated. Alex, let's come up with some other examples on the fly. Can you think of 1 or 2?
okay, sure. The NPC chapter of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow had me totally discombobulated.
Oh, that's really good. And that's also very true.
Yeah.
The ending, not to give anything away, but the ending of Divine Rivals had me discombobulated.
Okay.
Little
Well,
sneak preview for you guys there.
yeah. To go along with that, the ending of Fourth Wing, I think, had the whole world discombobulated.
Not Doug,
Not
apparently.
Doug, true. The whole world minus Doug.
But how about Sam's feelings for Sadie in this book had him a little discombobulated.
Okay. Sadie's relationship with Dove had me discombobulated.
Dove not being punched in the face the entire novel had me discombobulated.
Accurate. All right. So here's some trivia about the word discombobulated from grammarist.com. When it first appeared in the US in the early 1800s, discombobulate was just a playful, rootless coinage conveying a sense of confusion. It was probably inspired by similar words like discomfit and discompose, but the bobulate part has no etymological origin whatsoever. So that's pretty interesting.
You're a coinage.
Your mom's a coinage.
Your mom's a
You're
grammarist.
a bobulate.
You want to get bobulated?
I can't.
Because as you know, we are all about booking and cooking. So let's get into our ingredient of the week. This week's ingredient is
pizza dough, inspired by the pizzeria that Sam's grandparents owned. We'll make something using that ingredient to discuss in our potty episode, which will air on Thursday.
Send us recipe suggestions on our socials, and we may feature them in the future. Okay, so before we get started, let's tell you why we chose this book. It has great reviews and is critically acclaimed.
It also has an interesting summary, and the title really drew us in.
Plus, can we look at that cover? Right?
Yeah.
I thought it was so yeah, I actually thought it was sci-fi. And I was like, let's throw this sci-fi book in there. Nice change of pace. Yeah, I was wrong. It's not sci-fi. So I'm not sure where I got that from. Maybe because I thought it was like a video game. Maybe it would be techie. I had my actual thoughts that I would like to tell you later when I rewrite the novel, but I'll ziplock that for now. But yeah, not sci-fi.
It does have a nice cover, though.
It does. Although, can we just say that I thought that it was a snowy mountain, and I was incorrect.
Yeah,
Apparently.
it's a wave.
I was like, this mountain has nothing to do with it. There is no snow in this novel. But apparently, Alex is correct. It is an ocean, so it's probably, Ichigo, the video game's little backdrop or something.
Yeah. All right. So before we dive into our discussion, here's a plot synopsis so everyone knows what this book is about. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow follows the story of Sam Major and Sadie Green. The two met as children when Sam was in the hospital due to a horrific car accident that resulted in the death of his mother. Sadie is also at the hospital visiting her older sister, who is being treated for cancer. Sam and Sadie bond over a mutual love of video games and develop a close friendship. Years later, the two have gone their separate ways but are reunited in Boston and ultimately decide to collaborate on the creation of a video game, Ichigo, which goes on to become a worldwide sensation and brings the pair fame, success, and riches. The novel spans 30 years, following Sam and Sadie from the time they meet through their successes and hardships. It explores themes of self-identity, friendship, tragedy, and resilience.
Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is written by Gabrielle Zevin. Like Sam in the book, Gabrielle has a mixed heritage. Her mother is a Korean immigrant, and her father is a mix of Jewish, Russian, Polish, and Lithuanian ancestry. They also both worked for the multinational technology company, IBM. Gabrielle lived in Manhattan for about a decade before relocating to Los Angeles. She received a degree in American literature from Harvard University, and while at Harvard, she also met her partner, who later went on to direct the film adaptation of Zevin's novel, Conversations with Other Women. Gabrielle Zevin is now a New York Times best-selling author of 10 novels. Wow. She also wrote the screenplays for the film adaptations of her novels, Conversations with Other Women and The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry. She's also currently working on this screenplay for Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. The novel recently sold the rights for a feature film in a 25-bidder auction.
All right, so let's get into our book discussion on Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. First up, what do we think of the title? Why do you think Gabrielle Zevin chose the title, and what are your thoughts on it?
I mean, my thoughts on it is that it depicts the novel because it takes a while to repeat and repeat and repeat and do the same thing over and over, kind of. But that's definitely not why she chose it. I think Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow was a reference to something.
Yeah.
Also, it definitely, because it's about two friends from childhood and their relationship throughout decades. So really, it is going tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Plus, when Sadie meets Sam for the first time when they're children, she does come to visit him the day, tomorrow and tomorrow. So it does have I feel like a full, maybe like a couple of meanings buried within it, if that makes sense. I don't know, what do you think?
So when I first saw the title, I thought, which actually makes sense why you would think that this is like a sci-fi book. I think this kind of sounds like a sci-fi title. It kind of sounds like a time travel title. But then in the book, they do explain that it is from Macbeth's speech within the book of Macbeth. I think actually
Yes, that's
Macbeth
right.
is the one who says it. Yeah. And I did like that she included it. And she does explain, I think during the NPC chapter, that Macbeth was his favorite Shakespearean play. And this was his favorite quote, I believe, from the book. And I thought that was really nice. I think also the quote from Macbeth is supposed to
Yeah.
be about like endings and things like that, about I don't know, like things coming to an end or not coming to an end. So I thought it was appropriate for the scene in which it was used, and I thought it was also appropriate for the novel with this idea of friendships ending and starting and ending and starting, and just different relationships throughout a lifespan that begin and end. So I actually, after reading it, I really liked the title, and I think that she chose it because it did kind of fit the story.
Yeah, you reminded me actually. I had made myself a note here on page 334 for anyone who has the physical book. But it's from a Macbeth Shakespeare soliloquy. The show must go on, and something that is included in the Easter egg of Sadie's game later on.
Yeah.
So it was interesting that he does say that tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow in Shakespeare. So I forgot about that, but yeah, that does make a lot of sense because Marx is an actor when they
Hmm.
first meet him in the beginning
Yeah.
of the story, and he does do Macbeth characters. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. I like the
Yeah.
title.
Yeah. I do think
Yeah.
it's annoying to say,
So-
but I do I do like it.
it's a lot to say, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zevin did us no favors with the title, speaking it.
Yeah.
But what do you think of the cover art? Does it fit with the content of the book? We had some
Yeah.
contrasting thoughts of the title. I mean,
Yeah.
of the cover.
I mean, I was a little confused by the cover art. After reading it, it makes a little bit more sense. You pointed out to me that in the Ichigo game, he's like taken out by a tsunami, and that's how he gets taken away from his home. So
Hmm.
that does make sense after reading it. However, I didn't really think that even after reading it, I didn't quite make the connection. I was like, I don't really know why there's a giant wave unless it's just supposed to be symbolic for like waves of change, throughout life.
Yeah.
I liked that the letters were in rainbow colors to reference the topics of gay marriage or same sex marriage within the novel. But overall, I don't know how I feel about the cover. I don't know if it really fits the content of the book and just how uh it just honestly it seems like a more fun cover. It's like a cool cover for a book that's really not very fun.
Yeah, I agree. I think the more I look at it, the more I realize that it is a beach. At first I thought the bottom of it was the snowy mountain, and I was like, this makes no sense. But now that I see it's a beach, it does relate to Ichigo, but it also relates to their relationship because through the years there are waves crashing into their relationship. There are things that add damage to their relationship, as well as the miscommunication trope that's in this novel. They don't communicate, and it really does diminish their relationship, just like a wave would diminish some of the ocean going in and out. So I think it does correlate. I think it's a fun cover. It's pretty to look at for sure. So
Yeah. Yeah, I like the cover. I just don't know if it fits really. The font reminds me of a video game. So, there you
yeah,
go.
the whole thing is reminiscent of an old school video game,
Mm,
right? Like one of those like uh what are they called? Pixelated old video
yeah.
games that you would
Yeah.
imagine this to have been. So
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this novel explores themes of sexism in the work fields and also just in general in the field of video game development. In what ways do we see Sadie struggling with this throughout the novel? And do we see any other characters struggling with this as well?
yeah, so we definitely see a lot of sexism in this book, a lot of sexism in the industry of creating video games. In the tech world, it seems back in, I think this was started in the 70s, 80s when they were making and developing games. And there was a lot of animosity towards females. There weren't a lot of females in the industry. So even when she was in a class, Sadie, when she started out, she was only in the classroom with another female student. She was one of only two. And she even had animosity from the other female student. And it kind of went to show that she was kind of just trying to maybe put Sadie down to make the men like her more or something. So this way she can get ahead. I'm not really sure, but There was a show that me and Doug watched on Apple TV that had I think it's called Mythic Quest, and it's more modern time, and in the developing world there are only two females in the office. So I'm not sure if that's changed. That's not my area of expertise, so I'm not really 100%, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I did see her struggling a lot, even sometimes when they would announce the game, even though Sadie did most of the work on Ichigo, uh, the reporters and everything automatically assumed that Sam, being, male, created the game and did all the work, and she did not. So, or when, for example, the other game that they made, a second game, when it didn't do as well as Ichigo did, they assumed Sadie made that one because it wasn't so good. So there was definitely a lot of sexism that I noticed in that. And not even just, she was also struggling with, her relationship to Dav. Dav was treating her in a sexist manner as well, which we'll get into a little bit later. So I think there's heavy sexism in this novel for sure. And even sexism, or maybe even like a homophobia, which we'll also discuss later too, which ties in. So
Yeah, I definitely think that there was a lot of sexism with Sadie. Definitely all the points that you made, I agree with. How when something was successful, they were very quick to minimize her involvement. And when something was considered a failure, they were very quick to overemphasize her involvement. Um, when she was in school, she was in, I think at the time, I think this is in like the 80s and 90s. And at the time, there just weren't as many women at MIT where she was studying. There weren't as many women in STEM fields, and they had to work a lot harder to be seen as serious in their fields. And I think that that was made clear in this book. I kind of liked reading that. I thought it was interesting and true to real life. And I think when we see, just in general, when Sam first meets Sadie, he's kind of like, "Oh, you like video games." I think that was a little bit of like, "Oh, but you're a girl." They didn't really explore that too much. He kind of accepted it, but I think initially he was kind of like, "Oh, do you even play?" um, I also saw sexism with Sam's mom when she was talking about, or when Sam was recounting her experiences trying to become an actress when Sam was young and she was out there trying to make a living. And she's going to audition for something that's kind of similar to that show with the suitcases that they have to open. Doesn't matter. It's like a game show. And
oh, Deal or
he
No Deal.
Deal or No Deal, right? Yeah, I couldn't think of the name. She goes in and the producer has her turning around and, critiquing her body, and her getting the job was based solely on her looks. It had nothing to do with her ability to act or anything other than how she looks. And I think that that was pretty prevalent in the novel as well. I think
Yeah.
even, Sam talks about Sadie always being so beautiful and how things were always so easy for her, and that it kind of brings out this idea that if a woman is pretty, she doesn't need to work at anything because she's just pretty and can get whatever she wants. And obviously we know that that's not true, and it's very easy for men to once again minimize a woman's work ethic and achievements because of the way that she looks.
Well, in what ways do you see Sam and Mark's struggling with racism throughout the novel? Because that's another prominent
Yeah.
theme in this novel. Do we see any other characters experiencing racism?
Well, we definitely see Sam and Mark struggling with racism, and I felt it was really clear when they were making Ichigo that a lot of people in the book were saying that, oh, the character of Ichigo looks so much like Sam and it must be based on him, when in reality Sam was from Korean and Jewish background and the character in Ichigo was Japanese. So it kind of makes you think that there's this stereotype that people from one type of culture are all the same and they all look the same just because of some similar characteristics that they may have. So I thought that that was touching on that idea in the novel. With Marx, he at one point is talking about how he really wants to become an actor. He really wants to pursue this as his career. And for some reason, he can never be cast in that leading role. He always ends up playing, the arrogant side character, the handsome side character. And he doesn't understand why. And he asks one of his friends at one point, and his friend says, well, And he kind of just like points to his face and he's like, what, because of my face? And he's like, because you're Asian. And I felt so bad for Marks at that point too, because I think that once again is very true to real life. You know, people do tend to look at all different cultures from the same area as just being one thing where Sam is concerned. And then they have less opportunities for success in mainstream media and in, the arts, because it's a very, white centric field. And I thought that it was really interesting to read about. I don't know if I saw it, it may have touched on other areas with some other characters as well, but those are the ones that stick out the most to me.
And then you see it as well with Sam's mom. Sam's mom is trying to be an
Oh,
actress, but she
yes.
gets cast in like, game shows and small roles, things that, she should probably have been at least tried for other roles, or at least
Yes.
considered for bigger roles,
Yeah.
TV shows or whatever.
I
But
know, something you said earlier when you brought up Sam's mom reminded me of when Sam was younger and he was walking on the streets with his mom, and there's an Asian woman who commits suicide literally right in front of them. Was that what you were thinking of?
I wasn't thinking of that, but that's definitely
Yeah,
another
because
issue as
yeah,
well.
during that scene, she explains that she has the same name, Anna Lee, and they say, oh, there's a lot
Right.
of us, Asian women in New York at that time that have that name, and it's because they needed to once again kind of whitewash their names so that they can have more opportunities in theater, which is what they were both
Right.
pursuing at the time. And that kind of goes back to the same issue that Marx was having, where there's just not as many opportunities, and you kind of have to change things about yourself to make it more mainstream, for audiences. That was a really hard scene to read about. That was really sad, but I did think it was
Yeah.
impactful, and she did talk about, her experiences with racism in the industry.
Yeah, that was a very important role, going with Sam's mom to correlate with her own life about what
Yeah.
she was going through. And also, Sam's grandparents own a pizzeria.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a comment was made about how do they own a pizzeria, or they had to change their names to something ridiculous. It was like Bong or something. They
Yeah.
couldn't have their actual names in the title of the pizzeria, the restaurant, because then people might get the wrong idea. Oh, Asian names making pizza or something like that. So
Yeah.
I seen that as well, and that was another message too. That's like, it's very stereotypical to consider, what kind of restaurants and who owns them and things like that. So
Yeah.
that was definitely something also there.
Yeah. All right. So, what did you think about the relationship between Sadie and Dove? I know you have opinions on this.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and as the relationship evolved, what changes did you see unfolding in their dynamic? And then to go along with that, Dead Sea was a video game that was made by Dove, which was Sadie's comfort game. Why do you think she continued to see that as a comfort after her relationship with Dove took a turn?
I can't stand Dove. He's awful. He's very sexist, first of all. Secondly, he's her teacher, and then she sleeps with him basically to excel in the class. And that's not on her necessarily. It just didn't sit right with me, all of that. But it's the way that he treated her the second time around. First of all, the first time around, he had a wife and a child. And he was committing adultery with his student, which is just disturbing on its own. But then when they break up and get back together, he's handcuffing her to the bed, leaving her there for hours. He's handcuffing her to the bed again, naked, might I add. And just leaving her in the room while he develops games. He handcuffs her to the bed when she's leaving him so that she can't leave. Just a lot of disturbing things, and it was hard to read that for me. I was just like, what is this? Why is he doing this? And why is she allowing this to happen? I don't know if maybe it was some kind of power dynamic for him, I assume, because he seems like a very arrogant, power driven guy. And for her, maybe she was just trying to get ahead, trying not to make waves. There's another tie into the artwork. Maybe she was trying not to make waves for her own career. I don't know, but she's just silently took it all, and I just couldn't understand that. For me, that was hard for me to see as a woman. And as far as Dead Sea being her comfort game, I know she did like the game before they started dating. and that's what attracted her to him, that, he was successful and all these things. But afterwards, I mean, this guy handcuffed you to a bed. He mistreated you in so many ways. He said he was going to leave his wife. He never did. He doesn't seem like the best guy. And after all of this time, of not seeing him anymore and having been handcuffed to the bed when you were trying to leave the relationship, I mean, so disturbing. You're still playing his game as a comfort game. I just thought that that was odd. So, I don't know. How do you feel about that? Just, it was odd to
Mhm.
me that that would still be her comfort game. Because if it was me, and I dated somebody and let's say they had a video game that they made or something, and then they were handcuffing me to beds and naked and leaving me there for hours and all these crazy things, this horrible, abusive, technically, relationship. I would want nothing to do with that person's anything. I would
Mhm.
throw out their pictures, let alone their game. I would never keep something and consider it my quote comfort. You know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
just interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think for Sadie, the game was it was her favorite game, and it was a comfort game for her long before she met Dove, and she was able to kind of separate the two in her brain, to separate the art from the artist. Which, I might not be able to do that, but there's plenty of people out there who can, and I think that's just the type of person that Sadie was, that she wasn't going to stop playing her favorite game or stop allowing a comfort of hers to be taken away by somebody that she no longer, likes, that she feels some kind of way towards, because it also kind of lets him win in a scenario like that as well. So if this is something that was important to you and that you enjoy and that's a comfort for you, don't let it be diminished because of how he treated you, even though he's the one who created the game.
Mm.
So I do think that Sadie's just that kind of person that can compartmentalize her emotions and separate out her feelings from, different areas of her life. But again, I mean, I don't know if I would do that. I probably would feel the same as you. I don't think I could separate those 2, but Sadie is a different kind of person, and I think that she's just that type.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that goes
Um,
back to the miscommunication trope again. There's a lot of miscommunication in this novel, like we saw with Happy Place.
yeah, and that, brings me back to Sadie and Dove's actual relationship, where I don't think she hated him as much as maybe the readers might dislike him or hate him, because she did really, I think, care for him at one point. He was with his wife the entire time that they were in a relationship, so he never actually left his wife until well after they broke up for the second time and she moved to Los Angeles. The
Mhm.
entire time that they were in a relationship together, I believe he was with his wife, or at least it was complicated with his wife. Um, he did constantly say, "Oh, I'm going to leave her." I think this very, very much mirrors real life. I think this happens with a lot of women out there who, they fall for somebody that is in a relationship and they think that this person's going to change for them or that they're going to leave their wife for them. And, 95% of the time it never happens, but every single day there's still somebody out there that's believing somebody when they say that. So I thought that that was realistic for her to be in a situation like that. I definitely think Dove enjoyed using his power over Sadie and just
Mhm.
over, I think, people in general and women in general. I do think it's with women, but I think it was just people in general, because I think even as we saw him as a teacher, he kind of got some type of enjoyment out of just trashing all of his students' games. Nobody was good enough. The only one who did kind of present something that he saw some inspiration in or some type of promise in was Sadie. And then as soon as he saw that, it was like this shiny new thing and he needed to have it as his own. And so
Mhm.
he did. My issue with their relationship, because as it evolved the second time around, it doesn't appear that this was present in their relationship the first time they're together, but then when they get back together, it seems like he wanted to explore some kinks, which is fine. We're not going to kink shame. However, it doesn't seem as though he ever requested consent from Sadie to participate in these things. He just started doing it. And Sadie never communicated to him whether she wanted to or not. So even though she does disclose to Marks later on that, she did enjoy some of it, there was also some things she didn't enjoy, and she never communicated that to Dove. He does handcuff her to the bed and then goes and plays video games. Again, this was, I think, part of that sexual kink for them. But once again, I think it was just one-sided. I do think Sadie needed to speak up more. We don't really know what would have happened if she had told him that she didn't want to. Maybe he wouldn't have listened and he would have done it anyway, or maybe he would have respected her wishes. We don't really find out because it's never made clear in the book. He was definitely emotionally abusive, and I think this is where the power comes in, because even after she's no longer a student and she's making her own games and her game is becoming wildly successful, he still makes it a point to make her feel naive and young and not as intelligent and not as successful as him, or just not as good as he is. So I thought that their relationship was definitely toxic. It was definitely harmful. But I think that there was a lot of gray area in this relationship. I think it was a very realistic relationship. Honestly, when, not to bring this back to Colleen Hoover, but when you look at
Oh God.
an abusive relationship, this is more realistic, where there's a lot of gray area, where somebody can be abusive but not abusive at other times, and there's just a lot of dynamics involved. It just, this just felt more real than it did in the previous novel if you're going to explore this kind of topic. To me, there were a lot of things here that were abusive, and there were some things that weren't abusive. And then, it just comes down to where was Sadie at this whole time? And we never really find out from her point of view what she was feeling, except, later in the book, she then says, oh, well, I didn't really want this. I didn't want to be in a relationship with him. But she never communicated and she never made a move to leave. And we don't really understand the reasons why. Except that
Yeah,
I
to
will say
piggyback.
Sadie just has a lack of action throughout the novel. She kind of just lets things happen to her. And we do have a question about this later on, so I'll kind of ziplock that for our discussion later on. But I do think that this is just another area of her life where she just allowed things to happen without trying to let them happen or trying to stop them from happening. And it's just been a consistency throughout her life.
To piggyback off two things you said. One, when he basically when she's his student, when Dov's student in the class in MIT, he says that he sees something in her and whatever. But later there's actually a quote where he's basically telling her that, oh, I seen something in you because I was really just trying to sleep with you.
Yeah.
So that was interesting to see.
Mhm.
That's not supportive. But the most interesting thing that I just realized too is that that kinky handcuffing and all that stuff didn't actually take place until they got back together the second
Yeah.
time. And that was after she called him, reached out to him, and said, we need to use something from your game as a
Mhm.
foundation for our game. And
Yeah.
that was for the, like the storm, whatever.
Mhm.
Because they had to have like a stormy background and he had great graphics or whatever it was. So I think he got a power trip from that. So it was interesting that the kinky stuff didn't start until after he had something over her like that. But it was hard to watch because, she would pick up the phone while she was handcuffed naked to a bed and he was in the other room playing or wherever he was doing whatever he was doing. And she would call Sam or somebody and she would just have a regular conversation like nothing was happening.
Mhm.
I thought she was going to call him and say, like, help. And she
Mhm.
never asked for help. It was just, oh, this is it. This is what it is, as if
Yeah.
maybe she was afraid to speak up or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
So that was interesting to see unfold for sure.
Yeah. I don't think that he wanted to engage in the kinks for that reason.
Mm,
I think it's something that he wanted to explore, and he knew that Sadie would allow him to explore it with him. I think he was pretty quick to pick up on the fact that she is just one of those people that will accept how she's treated and doesn't really make a move to change that one way or another. And he was very quick to
right.
exploit that from her. So I don't think he was necessarily like, oh, well, I'm going to give you my game and you're going to do this shit with me. I think it was more just
Well,
like,
no,
you're
maybe
kind of
not, but it's
somebody that I can take advantage of, and I'm going to take advantage of it because I want to do these things, and what you want doesn't really matter.
right. It's just interesting because he didn't do it the first time around. He did it the second time around. So
Yeah.
that's why I thought maybe.
Well, I mean, that's
But
kind of
he's
normal
just a
in
douchebag
relationships
overall.
as they evolve and people try new things. And
Yeah, like he was just trying to see what he can get away with every time she came back to him,
yeah.
basically.
Hmm.
Yeah, we don't like you, Dove. You's evil, man. He's the villain in the video game of this book.
I think Sadie's a little bit of a villain at
Yeah.
times.
I think they're
Not
all
in that
villains
not
in
in
their
that
own way. Not
situation.
as
Yeah.
No, not in that situation. Absolutely not. But
Yeah.
while Sadie's speaking of the video games that she presented in MIT when she was a student, while Sadie's Emily Dickinson game that you created is being critiqued for class, why do you think her female peer is so disparaging of her work? And why do you think Sadie struggles to establish friendships with her female classmate?
Yeah. So I think that this goes back to what you were saying earlier, that maybe because there's not a lot of women in the field, they feel like they have to drag other women down because it makes them feel like they're part of the, the men's group. And that's really what I think it comes down to. I think that
Right.
a people are going to be more critical of your work as a woman in general. And I think other women are going to be even more critical. I think, in addition to that, this was the one game that seemed to get some good feedback from the teacher, who was Dove at the time, but it was the only game that got some, he said, it's not a great game, but it's not bad either. And it was the only one that he said wasn't bad. And I think that she was probably
Right.
jealous. And I think that there was some of that as well when it came to establishing friendships, that there's too much competitiveness in the field, and that they were
Mhm.
essentially each other's competitors. As the two female in the class, I think she felt like she needed to outdo Sadie, and she didn't. She never did. So I think that's where that came from.
Right. And it's so sad that females,
Yeah.
being the minority in that classroom at that time during that period, would not be supportive of each other, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but I didn't like the female peer at all. I don't remember her name, but she was very critical of her work, Sadie. But she also was quick to accuse her of sleeping with the teacher. You know, she
Hmm.
was quick to be like, "Oh, well, you're sleeping with him, so your little relationship is why you're excelling." Which, before she was even sleeping with her teacher, she was still excelling. She
Yeah.
made a game that maybe the other female in the class found disturbing, and maybe it was a little, but it definitely stood out. And it was definitely not because she was sleeping with the teacher; it was because she was,
Yeah.
a creative game maker. So I do think there was definitely some animosity and jealousy there, like you said as well. So, and it was sad because at that time, instead of being supportive, she kind of was jumping on the bandwagon of, oh, let me just bash this female. So this way the males will take me more seriously, perhaps. And no one
Yeah.
ever did, because nothing really amounted. We never really heard anything from her
Yeah.
again. So
Yeah.
it just goes to show, you should be supportive instead of trying to bring another female down unless they truly deserve it. No, I'm only
Absolutely.
kidding.
No, women should support other women. We shouldn't be dragging each other down for, no good reason.
Yeah.
um, but sadly, this is something that still happens today. I think it's not fully gone. It's much better than it certainly was at that time, but I think that this is something that still happens.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, sexism is definitely still alive and functioning in this world today, for
Yeah.
sure. I'd love to say that we've made a lot of progression. We have, but you can't say it's obsolete.
No, it definitely isn't. All right. So during the novel, in what ways does Sadie appear to struggle with depression or her mental health in general? And is this topic explored in other areas of the novel?
Yeah. Well, particularly at the end, Sadie is definitely struggling with depression. Her mental health is not there. Spoiler alert, when her husband dies, but we'll leave who her husband is for later. Um, Wait, is she married to him? Or she was engaged to him?
Neither.
No,
So
they were
he
married, right?
he wanted no, he kept proposing and wanted to get married, and she didn't believe in marriage. But they were
Right.
expecting a child
The
together.
father of her child.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So she was the father of her child the father of her child dies while she's pregnant, and then she struggles with this. She's becoming now a single mom. She thought she was going to have someone supportive and loving in her life to help her raise this child, and she completely abandons all of her responsibilities. She doesn't show up to work. She doesn't assign assignments to her team. She no longer directs everyone at work. So her whole life falls apart, and she completely falls apart with it by not doing what she's supposed to do instead of distracting herself. And I feel like throughout the whole book, she was distracting herself. Maybe that was her coping thing, making the comfort game her ex abuser. Like, oh, he's not gonna win over me. Look, I'm still gonna play this game. Who knows? But she completely falls apart towards the end of this book and completely buries herself, like a tick in her own sorrow, so to speak. Yeah. So I mean, you could tell throughout the book that she's not exactly a super happy woman. When her and Dove break up for the first time, she buries herself in her bed in her dorm room and doesn't come out until Sam comes by repeatedly, literally tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, until she comes around and he says, let's make a video game together. So I feel like she is always struggling with her mental health, unless it has to do with, creating video games, something she loves. Except maybe Sam brings her out in the end, but there is in the middle there when she loses her baby daddy, so to speak. That she just completely falls apart and lets it happen, which is the first time we really see her do that, other than Dove. So I think when it comes to male characters that she has relationships with, she just lets herself fall apart, which is another symbolism, perhaps, of sexism.
Yeah, I think I really liked the way that Gabrielle Zevin handled mental health in this book. And I think that it was clear that Sadie, this is something that she struggled with even from the time that we meet her as a 12-year-old, or 11 or 12 in the very beginning, where she is reflecting on feeling cast aside by her family, by her parents, because she does have an older sister who's a couple years older than her, who is undergoing cancer treatment. She's in and out of the hospital for cancer. She does eventually recover, if anybody was wondering, and she lives a healthy life after that. But during this few year span while she is going through treatments, Sadie reflects on feeling, like I said, cast aside by her family. Nobody pays attention to her. They don't know if she's eaten. At one point, she's starving. She hasn't eaten in hours. And, when she's trying to find food, everybody's just like, just go sit down and be quiet somewhere because your sister's sick and we have to focus on your sister. And I think that this idea that Sadie has to just sit aside and be quiet and her concerns are not important or not valued is why we eventually see her struggling with the things we see her struggling with in the future, where it comes to Dove and then eventually her issues with Sam. But I thought it was interesting to kind of see that happen early on in her life. And then, yes, as she gets older, we see her struggling with it after the breakup with Dove. And I think that was just from a lack of coping skills, in addition to, she really probably was, she's not diagnosed in the book, but she probably really was struggling with depression and she needed to be treated for it. And she wasn't, and nobody else in her life outside of Sam was really doing anything to help her at that point. And then again, we see her go through the same spiral again later on, where her whole life is kind of ripped apart and she feels lost after the death of not her husband, but her partner. And we see her
Right.
going through that same cycle of depression where she has no motivation to go to work. She has no motivation to get out of bed. The only difference being in this scenario is that she is now going to have a child that she's going to have to be present for. And I think that's what eventually does get her out of it. I think we also see her struggling with pressure with the video game world. So when the first game Ichigo becomes really popular, she does kind of go through a less severe depression where she starts really getting angry at Sam and a little bit of Marks as well, feeling like they were taking over her game, even though once again she told them, yeah, you do this, I don't want to do it, you go and do it, and then getting mad at them for doing it. um, and then same thing with both sides now. When her second game, when that doesn't do well, she kind of holes up again, and it's Sam and I think Marks who kind of pull her out of that at that point as well. That, just because you have this one failure doesn't reflect on who you are as a person. And it's not, it's okay. You're going to get past this and it's going to be okay. But to her, it was the end of the world. She just was spiraling. So I really liked the way that we saw this consistency in Sadie's character. I really liked the way it was handled. I think we do see this in other areas. So we talked about a little bit earlier the woman who committed suicide, got into that a little bit with feeling like she just, like, what was the point? She just kept doing the same thing. She tried so hard and kept trying and trying and trying, and it just didn't make a difference in the end. And she eventually, chose to commit suicide, which luckily Sadie never got to that point, but maybe she would have if Sam or Marks hadn't stepped in at some point.
Yeah, that's interesting to note because I remember when the woman does committing suicide, when she's dying and Sam's mother is there with her, she says, I have to ask you what made you do it,
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm sorry I asked that. And she was like, no, she goes, I just didn't know how else to leave.
Yeah.
And that was very impactful to read that. That
Yeah.
scene was tough.
Yeah.
It was so sad because I maybe part of me wants to think that maybe it's just a symbolism for a woman, I mean, also she being an Asian woman, maybe that's also an added complication. But just a symbolism for a woman not knowing how to make it in a man's world and just giving
Mm-hmm.
up. Where Sadie, when she wanted to give up, she had friends, and her friends pulled her through. I
Yeah.
guess. Ironically, those friends were male,
Mm.
but you know,
Yeah.
Ziploc.
Yeah. Actually, just to kind of go back to our discussion on the sexism, that actually is a really good point to bring up, that both of her friends, Sam and Marks, were men, but they both had like a thing for her. They just never told her until at some point,
Mhm.
one of them does, but they were really only friends with her because they secretly were pining for her. And eventually they became colleagues in making a game together, but that's kind of what drove the friendship to begin with.
Hmm. That brings us to the next question, which is really good, thought provoking question. Sadie's new game idea after Ichigo is called Both Sides and explores the tale of a girl caught between real life and a fantasy world. Sadie explains that she came up with the idea on the night Sam was missing. So, what do you think this indicates about Sadie's mental state and happiness relative to her life?
Yeah, I loved this part of the book. So when I was reading it, I thought it was really interesting that Sadie is, I think this is how Sadie really feels in her life. She's kind of caught between this reality that she is unhappy with and this fantasy world of a video game where she can make it. She can make this fantasy world into whatever she wants. She can make it into a world that she enjoys more than the one that she's in. But at the end of the day, she has to keep coming back to this reality. And once again, I think that really speaks volumes about her mental state. I think it really explains depression really well, that you can kind of look at your life and feel like, I just wish this wasn't my life. I wish that this was my life instead. Um, and in the real world, Sadie really didn't take any actions to improve her life. So everything in her life was propelled by something else. So, um, you know, as a kid, she's being thrown into situations because of her sister. She doesn't really have a lot of friends. She's just kind of carted from here to there and is at the will of her parents. As she gets older, she's in school and she's kind of once again in the situation where she doesn't have a lot of friends. It's really difficult for her to make friends. So she doesn't really have a lot of connection. And then I don't think she ever really would have made Ichigo or a video game that would have become as successful if it hadn't been for Sam literally hounding her and saying, like, I want to make a game with you. I want to make a game with you. And he really convinces her to do it. And she's like, I don't think we should. I don't know. I still have to do this, or, and then eventually he pushes her and she's like, all right, yeah, let's do this. And then it's the same thing, with her relationship with Dove, where she feels like, maybe I don't want to be in this relationship, but she just allows the relationship to happen. It was actually kind of abrupt, even because when they get back together, well, first of all, when they first get together, they're out to lunch, her and Dove, and he's just like, I want to take you back to my apartment. And she just says, okay, and just goes, even though she maybe, wasn't sure if she wanted to or not. And then the second time she goes to ask him for the game, and then they're just back together at that point. And once again, we will get into this a little bit more where it comes to Sam. She ends up blaming Sam for this, but she kind of just allows this relationship to happen without saying, like, actually, I don't know if this is what I want. And I think that her lack of action in so many different areas of her life is what impacts her depression, and vice versa. I think her depression also makes her feel ambivalent about a lot of things. I think she kind of feels apathetic in a lot of ways because she does have this depression that's constantly in the back of her, that's going untreated. And her only outlet really is video games. So I really liked this idea in the book of the game. I thought it was a really cool way of describing mental health and mental health struggles in a way that somebody like Sadie would understand when it comes to video games. And I think that this whole situation, this whole game, and how it was explained really said a lot about her mental state and how she viewed her life, which is unhappy.
Yeah. I think this stems back also to the thought of female oppression. So real life and fantasy world, she wants to be the video game producer, a video game creator in a man's industry, so to speak. So she wants to excel, but she doesn't want to excel just because she's a woman and she could sleep with whoever to get their video game, enhancements or whatever. But in reality, she's kind of faced with the decision with Dov. She wants something from him and he wants to sleep with her. So she thinks, oh, I'll get what I need if I just give him what he wants. So she's kind of surrendering there. So she's never really, her real life is kind of just surrendering to this industry that's patriarchal, where she's a female who really would like to succeed. So the whole fantasy world aspect of it would be her succeeding, So I like the whole idea of that being both sides, where her depression is really just a symbolism her depression is really a symbolism of like female oppression. But in the aspect, I did like this part too about the both sides. I really love the writing of this because when her and Sam were kind of estranged, in this section of both sides, their paragraphs, their, you know, what's going on in their life is also estranged. They're completely separated. They're not brought together. There's like the separation of A, Sadie, and B, Sam, or vice versa. And it's not really like them combined together because they're not working side by side. On this project, he wasn't really supportive of this project. So I think it's interesting too, because when she is missing Sam that night and she can't find him, she has a revelation that she does care for Sam. She cares if he's missing. She cares about what happens to him. And she never really had anybody care for her as much, or she feels that way because all the attention was on her sister who was sick when she was growing up. So I think she doesn't want to live in the real life. She gets depressed in the real life. In her fantasy world or wherever else she can transport herself to, when she creates games, she becomes somebody else.
The novel explores themes of power, control, and privilege in various areas of life. In what ways do we see these themes play out throughout the book?
I mean, we definitely see the power struggle with females in this industry. We see the power struggle with Dove in the relationship and just overall, even with his students. He's controlling by putting her on the bed and naked, telling her, you're going to be naked and you're going to be in handcuffs, and just leaving her there. And he's getting full authority to do that, even though that's not what she really wants. She doesn't say no, So I think that all of that, and the privilege too of being a male in this industry, which is predominantly male, I think we see that throughout the entire novel. We see that also, but in a different way. It's a different power struggle when it comes to let's say, like, coming up in the 80s or 90s, for homosexual people that want to marry same-sex relationships. We see issues with that as well, and them playing out, being in this video game world is kind of on par with how females were treated. perhaps even worse. A man is killed, not to give anything away later on, we'll get into it, but a man is killed over the fact that they allowed same-sex marriages inside of a game.
Yeah.
So, we see that throughout the entire book, that there's so many different levels of power, control, and privilege. And I think that's interesting to have that many levels in a book that's about video games. Videos have levels. So again, I think that Gabrielle Zevin's writing is very powerful when it comes to that. She
Mhm.
definitely gets her messages across well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we see a lot of the power and control in the relationship with or between Sadie and Dove. We definitely talked about that. I think we also see this a little bit between the relationship between Sadie and Sam, where while reading, it constantly felt like there was a power struggle between the two. Not so much when they
Hmm.
first started working together, but once Ichigo finally started getting popular, at that point, I felt that their relationship kind of took a turn where they were constantly kind of struggling with, well, this is what our next project is going to be. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to do this. And it was just a lot of back and forth and a lot of animosity between them. And that kind of ties in with the control is that, they each wanted to be in control of this project or this, what would you call it? I don't know what it's called, but their company, I guess it's a company, Unfair Games.
Yeah,
Um,
company.
yeah.
Right.
So they're fighting for control over, what direction that's going to go into. And then when it comes to privilege, I thought that this was seen a lot in the novel with Marks and Sam when it came, and really all of the minorities in the book, because you could also talk about Sam's grandparents and his mom, but there were just things that they were not able to do because of their cultural background. And I think that plays into the privilege, especially in the scene I mentioned earlier, where Marx is asking his friend, how come I can't get these roles in these plays that I want? And he's telling him it's because of his ethnicity. But his friend didn't have any issues with that. The people that were around him were not having these same struggles. They had the privilege of being able to go audition for a role and not having to worry about, what they look like. And I felt that that was pretty consistent throughout the novel. I think that Sam dealt with that as well when it came to his disability. He felt like he was much more disadvantaged, and he was. There were a lot of things he couldn't do. It was difficult for him even to just go walk to Sadie's apartment because of the issues that he had with his foot, which for anybody that hasn't read the novel, his foot was severely damaged in the car accident when he was a kid. And even though they do, numerous surgeries, it never fully healed and he couldn't really use it. Um, so I think we see that in the novel as well as the privilege of just being able to walk on your own 2 feet and walk to your friend's apartment without having to have a struggle. Um,
Right.
and I think to go along with the sexism, privilege of, what men are able to do in a world run by men versus what women are able to do or how much harder they have to work in certain fields, especially. So I do really appreciate Gabrielle Zevin's writing. I thought the writing in this novel was fantastic, and I thought that she handled all of
Hmm.
these themes really well. And I thought she got the points across without hitting you over the head with them. It was subtle at
Yes.
points, but you really got the message, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Subtle but impactful, for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, and going back to both sides too. I mean, Sam experienced that himself because he was
Mhm.
struggling with his real life versus his fantasy world. He wanted to, uh, have Sadie. He wanted to do all these things that he never just communicates at all. He can't, because of the car accident, it completely, damaged his foot for the rest of his life. He lost his mom in the car accident. So many things happened because of that. And I feel like he struggles as well in that area where, even though he wasn't on board with her project to make both sides, he also, maybe he was just it was a defense mechanism because he also felt that way and he was trying to deny that to himself.
Yeah.
Interesting thought. So,
Yeah. It's actually really
well,
interesting because throughout this book too, Sam kind of views Sadie as this person who like has everything. You know, she can do anything, she can live her best life, and she kind of views Sam as that. Like she knows that he has the disability, but she also feels very resentful towards Sam, feeling like he gets all
Yeah.
of the success and accolades for the game, and you know, he doesn't
Because of his
seem,
gender.
yeah, and he doesn't seem to be. So they both felt that the other one was privileged in certain ways, while they were both also
Mhm.
feeling very, you know, insecure about themselves at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, that goes back to the miscommunication trope too, because he's looking at her saying, "Oh, well, things are coming easy to you because you're a pretty woman," and
Mhm.
she's looking at him like, "Well, things are coming easy for you because you're a man in this industry." So
Yeah. And in addition to that, I know a big theme with Sam as well was classism. So I know he makes it a point to talk about how he always struggled in poverty. He was never well off, where Sadie came from a very rich family who was always
mhm.
able to give her whatever she wanted. And, you know, in that way, she was very privileged. And he, once again, I think always felt a little resentful of that as well.
Yes. And also, it goes back to Sadie in that video game that was disturbing in the class. It disturbed the other female peer that was in the class. And the video game actually was you didn't get ahead if you complied, if you were, being divergent against what you were supposed to do and actually asked questions and fought against what you were being presented with, that you would get ahead in the game, and that's how you leveled up. And the game was being like on some kind of a control line or something, and like it had to do with Nazism, right? Because she
Yeah.
comes from a Jewish heritage, so she
Yeah.
created this game to say that, oh, you're not complying with the Nazis. Like if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, then you're rebelling, and that you get ahead in the game.
Mhm.
So I think that she might have had some conflict as well, about her own heritage, perhaps, or about her struggles with what that heritage presents to her or has presented to people in, of her, like her situation, of her
Mhm.
culture in the past, like with the Holocaust and such.
Mhm. Yeah.
So there's a lot of struggles in this book,
Yeah.
a lot of themes that
Yeah.
Gabrielle Zevin takes on and just really, like Alex
She
said, doesn't
yeah.
shove it down your throat, but subtly just lets you know, like, hey, there's a message here, pay attention.
She writes extremely complex characters. So these are real life struggles that real life people would have. And one person does not always have just one struggle in their life. They don't have just one issue or one flaw. They're complex. And Gabrielle Zevin
Hmm.
really fleshed out these characters and really explores the different areas of their lives, and you know, where they are successful and where they maybe need to show some improvement, and doesn't judge them for it. She just allows it to unfold on the page. And I just love that in a book when you're writing a character drama. I mean, that's what you want to see.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the video game that they create is like two-dimensional, but the characters are so three-dimensional. So I like that as well, to show like, oh, they're not two-dimensional like the video game itself,
Mm,
not the video game character. There's something more behind the scenes. So
hmm.
it was good
Yeah.
to read.
Hmm.
So Sam appears to struggle with feelings of ineptitude throughout his life. In what ways do you see this throughout the novel, and why do you think this is a struggle for him?
Yeah. So I think that Sam feels this way for a few reasons. So I think one is that he did struggle with racism throughout his life, and that kind of had an impact on his self identity. In addition, his disability, I think, is a real big driving force behind his feelings of ineptitude. And just in general, he's described as kind of a small guy, like not very, you know, not very manly. He's kind of,
Muscular.
yeah, you know, he's I think he considers himself to be kind of this like non-masculine man that is unappealing to the opposite sex. And I think we see this consistently in his relationships. We definitely see it with Sadie, where you know, he acknowledges towards the end of the book that he always had feelings for her, and he even feels jealous of her at one point for being in a relation, or he feels jealous of his friend for being in a relationship with her. And he never feels confident enough to communicate how he's feeling because he feels that his emotions will not be reciprocated. and he feels that just in general, he's not maybe good enough. And I think that that comes down to a lot of the struggles he had throughout his life. And I think that's really where it comes from. I don't know if I have more to expand on that.
Yeah, so I found myself feeling sorry for Sam a lot. He was the one character I felt like had, really the shit end of the stick. When he was younger, he seen this woman fall to her death. He, had to go escape essentially into video games multiple times in his childhood. That was his escape. So he sees that issue happen. His mom, had to handle that. And then when he gets into the car accident with his mother, he not only loses her in the car accident, but he, is disabled for the rest of his life. His father was never really in the picture. So I think that also is something that, he had to struggle with, of course. So I feel like, when he was in the hospital, after losing his mom, it's made clear by the nurses that he hasn't spoken to anyone. He's kind of giving up. And Sadie keeps coming back because she's seeing her sister. So she becomes a friend. She does become a friend, even though she doesn't admit it as much as she should. And then the miscommunication starts there because for her bar mitzvah, I believe it is, that she has to have a certain amount of community points or something. So she has a timesheet that she fills out when she goes to see him. And he finds out about it from her sister, who I feel like maybe sabotaged that, or maybe she just wanted Sadie to be honest, however you want to see it. But basically, Sam finds out and assumes now, okay, the only person that I, allowed myself to be open with after my mom's death is not maybe my friend at all. So I think that that had, you know, that was really hard on him. He struggled with that. And then later on, when they do reconnect again, he is the driving force to want to make the game with her and to make her snap out of her situation. So, uh, I see him struggling throughout the novel, especially with communication. Perhaps maybe he just feels like he's never good enough. I'm not sure what the issue is with him. I feel sorry for him. I do. And I really wish he would have communicated with Sadie more. Perhaps maybe he would have gotten more of what he wanted. Maybe they were never really happy individually because they never really communicated to be together. Maybe that's something that's a message underlying there. Because I do know that they aren't exactly happy unless they're working together. And perhaps their relationship should only be platonic, but maybe it was meant to only be platonic. But when they are divided, you see in their work that it's not the same, it's not as efficient as when they do come together and create together on the same page. Everything always shines and it's more
Yeah.
successful, their products. So,
Yeah. I think he does say at the end of the novel to Sadie that he never told her how he felt because he never thought that she would feel the same, or that, he didn't think he was good enough for her. So you can definitely see that that's kind of how he perceived himself.
yeah,
Yeah.
it could be why they were never really happy individually. Maybe because they were supposed to be together and it just never happened that way. And it could also explain why their need for a fantasy world. He creates a game, Sam, at one point where he can be with Sadie. He basically creates the entire game for her to bring her back to reality, to bring her back from her fantasy depression, or however you want to. It's not a fantasy depression, but a symbolism, for her wanting to be in a different situation. So, it's definitely he definitely goes out of his way to try and you know get her approval, her attention, and to get her to be who she can be, because he actually is one of the only ones in the well, maybe Moose as well, but he really does see her as like someone who's successful and someone to look up to, not necessarily just a pretty face that can do something. He sees her for who she is and how great and intelligent and creative she can be. So
Hmm.
he sees the potential in her work, where nobody else perhaps notices.
I actually think Marx is the only one that really sees Sadie for who Sadie is. I think Sam sees Sadie and uses Sadie for his own purposes. So I think he
Hmm,
saw the excellent
that's
work in
interesting.
Sadie's games, and I think he saw the potential that she would have, and I think he wanted to capitalize on that. Because at the point where they are reunited at the beginning of the novel, he's not even involved in making video games. He's studying to become an accountant or a mathematician or something along those lines. And he's not really
Right.
happy with his career choice, but he just enjoys playing video games. He doesn't know anything about making them. And then he plays Sadie's game. She gives a copy to him, as you know, and says like, let me know what you think of it. I just made it for class. And I think he sees the potential for success, but he can't do it without her. And I think he 100% uses her to get success because he can't do it without her. Um, so I do
I don't
feel
know
that
if
way.
I see where you're coming from, but I don't know if I agree with that. I feel like Sam's escape is video games, and I feel like he sees Sadie as an opportunity to continue, that escape. So maybe working with her will help him to escape further into video games. Maybe you're right. Maybe he is, doing it for a selfish reason, but neither of them have anybody in their life that can actually be supportive for them to them
Mm.
individually. So I feel like they're the only support system that they ever had. I feel like Mark's, yes, he was supportive with her, but also he wanted to sleep with her. I know that Sam maybe wanted to sleep with her, but he never brings that to her attention. Maybe he just felt like it would ruin the dynamic of their work together because they do work so well together. So maybe I don't know. I'm
I don't think they
conflicted
do.
with
I don't
that.
think they do work well together. I don't think they are a good match in a relationship. I don't think they're a good match
In a
professionally.
friendship
I
either.
I, I
Yeah.
think
Well, they do
they
make more
produce,
successful games when they work together.
yeah, but I think their professional relationship is too confrontate, like I don't know. They just don't seem compatible in, and I think part of it is that Sadie is really difficult to work with. But I disagree about neither one of them having a support. I do think that Marks was a very big support to Sam. I think that he was a
Oh,
genuinely good
definitely.
friend to Sam, and I think he had a really
Yes.
good support in him. I think he was also a good support to Sadie. I mean, just because you're, in a relationship with somebody doesn't mean that you can't have them as a support. I mean, I would consider my husband a huge support in my life, and it's not only because you know, we can be intimate. It's because, there's other reasons why he's a support. So I think Marks was my favorite character in the book. And I think he was a genuine support to both Sam and Sadie. And I think he is the only
Right.
reason that they ever worked well together. I think he was the glue that kept their whole company together and that
Well, he was also the
produced
financial glue as
really good
well.
games. Yeah, he was. But I think that his dynamic being a support for both sides is what allowed them to work together as successfully as they did for as long as they did. And I think as soon as you took him out of the equation, I don't see them being able to work together again. It's just I don't know. It's just
I
how I
agree
feel
with you
about it.
about Marks being my I agree with you about Marks being my favorite character in the book. I just feel like he's the
Yeah.
only non-toxic character
Yeah.
in the book.
Yeah.
I don't know about all the characters, but of the main characters,
Of the
Sadie and
three.
Sam are toxic individually for sure,
Yeah.
and toxic together, except when it comes to creating video games together. I feel like they do well with that. Um, well, when they're on the same page, in the
Yeah.
same boat. Marks, though, I mean, he's the only one who is supportive of everyone. He really is a great
Mhm.
guy.
Yeah.
He's supportive. He helps, and perhaps maybe it's a little selfish because he wants to make money too. And he doesn't develop video games. He's just their financial backer. But he's always supportive with Sam with everything. I mean, when everybody was, neglecting Sam's needs or whatever the case may be, he was his roommate, and he always made sure he went out of his way to help him and do the right thing. And then when Sadie comes on board, he's supportive with her as well, and maybe it's for other reasons because he's a guy and that has some undertones in the book. Who knows? But he's definitely supportive because if she doesn't make games, he doesn't make money either. Don't forget.
Yeah, but
But
he
once they
didn't
become a relationship, I feel like that's not the case. I don't get that
but
vibe from Marks.
he didn't ask to be
I get a good
involved with
vibe
the
for
video games. They asked him, he wasn't like, "Oh, you guys are making a video game. I want to be in on that." They were like, "Hey, we need to make a
well, I
video
said I
game
don't get
and
that
you're
vibe
you're
from Marks.
rich."
So
Yeah. Well,
yeah, I don't
right.
get that vibe from him. He's the only, like I said, only non-toxic character in the main character in the book, and the only non-toxic person in their lives,
Yeah.
because everyone else is toxic around them.
Yeah. Mm.
Sam's mom wasn't toxic. Um, but
No.
she dies when he's very young. So,
And his grandparents are very supportive as well. He's just
oh
doesn't live
yeah,
close to
true.
them. And I think we get the impression that Sadie's family isn't necessarily unsupportive of her. I think she's just not too close with them. But there is one scene where she, is communicating with her sister, who she's not very close with, but her sister still says, like, oh, you made a video game? That's awesome. I'm going to play it tonight, even though she's very busy. She's a doctor now, and she still makes the time to play it because it's her sister. So I think they do have other supports. They're just not in the same area. They don't live near each other because they grew up in California and they both now live in Boston. So they're just far away from some of their other supports.
Right.
And we don't really see
I think
those
Sam just,
relationships much in the book. Yeah.
I know. And Sam just wants Sadie to be his like support, or he wants to be the support for her too. And sometimes it just doesn't work out that way.
Yeah.
The novel explores the politics of same sex marriage and homophobia. So, how do you think this topic was handled in the novel?
I thought that Gabrielle Zevin did a really good job of handling this topic. So, this book takes place prior to same sex marriage being legalized. And I guess at the time, you didn't really see it in media, and people were really upset that it was included in this video game. You touched on this a little bit earlier. So, what happens basically is that these two young individuals come to the place where Sadie and Sam have their company headquarters. They're actually out promoting a different game, and Marks is there, and they come with the intention of killing Sam because they believe that Sam is kind of the mastermind behind this game, which he really wasn't. I don't even think he made this game. They, at this point, they own this company and they have other people working there that are also developing games. And it was their game instead. And either way, they see him as the face of unfair games. So they came with the intention of killing him. And instead, Marks is kind of caught in the crossfire and is killed. So I thought that she handled this really well. This seemed like a realistic thing that has happened, that would happen, and I think that she handled it with a lot of, again, subtlety. It wasn't, you weren't being smashed over the head with her message, but you still got the point. And I think she did a good job of really navigating this topic in the novel.
I agree. I think her writing was excellent and her message was well received. And it's definitely realistic, like you said. I mean, especially, you know, at this time frame where they're developing these games, it was kind of taboo to have anything like that in media or in video games. And people weren't responding well, as we see. And they accused Sam of it because he hadn't, I don't know if he was the mastermind that made this game, but he was the face of it since he was, it was like an online world play and he was the mayor, right? He like made himself the mayor. So
That's
people
right.
assumed that he was the, the backing force of this game. And they do have employees that work for them that are do have a same sex relationship. They did go and get married before the ruling was overturned, and they wanted to include them. They wanted to show that they're included basically and have their marriage redone in their video game. So they established that in their game world. And obviously, these individuals had an issue with it, which is very realistic. Like we said before, sexism is very much still alive in this world, unfortunately, and so is homophobia. We see that all the time. So especially in this time frame. So I think that the message was
Yeah.
handled well. I think the writing was very powerful. I think that it seems very realistic that something like that could have happened, unfortunately. And it just goes to show that it's a lot of different faces throughout the decades of video game creation. It does show that you're not allowed to put certain things, or at least at this time you weren't allowed to put certain things into games. You weren't allowed to be a certain gender. It was more one sided gender who was making and creating these games, and that was more well received by the public. So I think she kept Gabrielle Zevin really kept in par with letting us know that video games were reflective of certain times and topics.
Yeah. And I like that she layers in this. You brought this up too about how in real life, they did get married, but then it was overturned. And they were able to put it into the video game instead. And it's similar to Sam and Sadie, where in their video game versions of their lives, they can kind of pursue their wants and desires that they maybe feel hindered from doing in reality.
Right.
So it once again, it just plays back to that theme as well.
Yes, for both sides, and how their reality and their fantasy worlds sometimes
Yeah.
dip into one another.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, during this scene, Marks is killed in the gunfire from these individuals who came to with the intention of killing Sam. So, in part 6 of the book, titled NPC, which stands for non-playing character, it's kind of like when you're playing a video game, it's the computer playing. What did you think about the author's decision to change perspectives and point of view during this part? And it also explores topics of death and the decision to ultimately pull the plug on someone who has been unresponsive for several months. So Marks has been in a coma at this point. What did you think of this section of the book overall?
This was my favorite part of the book.
Yeah.
This was so well written. The change of perspective was so impactful. You know, it really brought you there. You were in the moment. You were the NPC. And I think this just goes to show that even though we consider Marks one of the main characters, he kind of was considered an NPC by Sam and Sadie the entire time. They never really showed appreciation for, you know, his financial backing, for the fact that he always supported Sam and that he was there for him. You know, he was the NPC character in a sense. So I just thought it was genius of her writing style, to just include this as a you. It was a second narration. You were the one that was in this situation. You were in a coma. You know, even though we know that it was Marks, while reading it, it's the reader that's transported into this situation and watching everyone around you. You know, even though you can't communicate. And I think it goes back too with the miscommunication trope that's going on with Sam and Sadie. But it's so much more impactful here because he wants to communicate, Marks, and he can't. He can't say anything to the people that are there with him, around him. And all he can do is just sit back while, you know, his coma takes over until his death. And
Yeah.
it was pretty wild to experience that. It was a reader's experience for sure. And I think that it made the book for me, because at one point I was just like, all right, what's happening? I was getting bored, I'll be honest. And then all of a sudden that happened and I was like, wow, this is something. It was
Yeah.
something memorable
Yeah.
in the book for me.
Yeah. I agree. This chapter came at the perfect time in the book because, like you, I was starting to feel frustrated leading up until this section because I just felt like the same things kept happening. It was the same miscommunications or lack of communication and just a lot of frustration. And it was starting to get a little played out and a little boring. And then this chapter hit, and I just I felt so discombobulated after reading this chapter. I actually couldn't even, I had to take a break from reading after I read this chapter. It just emotionally destroyed me. I felt so emotionally connected to Marks, who throughout this book, we're not really seeing anything from his point of view. And then all of a sudden, we're inside his head while he's in this coma. And, you know, like you said, Jess, we're experiencing this kind of purgatory in between life and death where he has cognitive ability and you can kind of see it coming in and out. So at some points, he is, you know, kind of in the room, he's present with his body, and then at other points, you know, he's flying through a video game world and you can kind of see where he's just towing the line between life and death. And I just thought the writing was heartbreaking. This whole chapter, I was just an emotional wreck. And I thought that the decision to change perspectives and the point of view was the perfect decision to make from a writing standpoint. It made the most impact. And it just, I can't say enough good things about this chapter in particular. I
Yes.
mean, it just destroyed me. I can't, it's just, I thought it was masterful. I
Yeah,
did.
it in a sense goes back to how I wanted this to be a sci-fi. It's not a sci-fi, this section, by any means, but it does put you into the role as if you're playing a video game. When you play a video game, you take on the role of someone else.
Mhm.
And in this section, as the reader, you become someone else. You know, you take on the role of Marks, and he's dying, and he experienced something so traumatic, and you're able to actually, you know, walk in his footsteps and, you know, be in his position and literally play his role as if he was a video game. So I just thought that from a video game book, from a writer's perspective, this was brilliant.
Yeah. And I did really like Mark's, because at first, when I first read this, I was like, I have no idea what the hell NPC means. So they did explain it in the book. I'm not a video game person. Um, so I was like,
Maybe
I
you
don't,
are the NPC. Ooh.
maybe I am, I don't know. But I was like, I have no idea what NPC is supposed to stand for. Even like when I first get a book, I usually look at the chapter titles and stuff like that. And when I saw that section title, I was like, what the hell? And then they explain it means, you know, non-playing character, non-player character. And I really liked how Marx during this chapter was reflecting on that's how he kind of felt throughout his life, is he was always the side character. He was never, even in his career pursuits, you know, which we talked about earlier, where he was struggling. He really wanted these main character roles and he couldn't get them. And that's just how he kind of felt throughout his life. He was always the sidekick. He was always the supporting friend. He was never the main character. And now he's dying and it's too late. And it was just so sad. I just, this whole chapter, like I said, it just killed me. It just killed me.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because going back to Gabrielle Zevin's writing really quick as an author, I feel like maybe we were bored and it was depressing the rest of the book because we were supposed to be taking on the role of Sadie and Sam as well, and experiencing what they were experiencing in a sense. I mean, not as impactful, obviously, as this section was. But that could be also part of it as well. Like, you know, they were depressed, so we're depressed sitting there
Well,
reading it, unless that's just my
100%.
outtake.
I mean, you can't, that this is not a fun book to read. This is not
Mm-mm.
a happy book. It's not a fun book, but
No, it's
it
depressing.
it would be weird to read a book about somebody who's depressed and feel happy. You know, like that
Oh, yay!
that
Look
would
at her,
be
she's down. Like,
that
yeah,
would that would be a
yeah,
serious tonal
exactly.
issue in the book. So
Agreed.
you know, we're not reading about happy people. We're reading about sad, complicated people and the struggles that they've been through, and then we're watching them continue to go through these struggles throughout the novel. So I mean, it would be weird if this was a fun book to read. And if,
Yes.
if you're going into this expecting it to be fun, just know that it's not. It's just not that kind of book, you know.
No,
That
and
doesn't
it's
mean
not
it's,
sci-fi.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean that it's a bad book. It's just a different kind of book.
Yes.
So
Yeah, and I feel bad for the book as well because I came off reading Fourth Wing and then reading this book, and I was just like, there's no dragons. No, I'm kidding.
yeah,
No,
it's a
no,
different reading experience for
exactly.
sure.
I
Yeah.
personally came from fantasy world into real life with this book.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
on me.
Yeah.
So, Sadie has a tendency to feel frustrated with some of her life experiences, but doesn't actively make an effort to change those circumstances. For example, her relationship with Dove, the perception that Sam was the mastermind behind Ichigo, you know, resenting him for the success, for the press and public thinking that he was responsible for all the work she put in, the death of Marks. She even ends up blaming Sam for these circumstances. So, do you think she's justified in placing the blame on Sam?
Absolutely not. So this, I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, in that Sadie has a tendency to externalize all of the issues in her life. So when it comes to her relationship with Dove, she blames Sam because he's the one that wanted her to go to him to get the game. And she believes that he should have known better because he knew that they had been in a relationship, as if that would really make a difference in the first place. I think Sam was just thinking about it logically, like, hey, we need a resource. You have this connection. He may or may not have known that they were in a relationship. I don't really think it matters if he knew or not. He was just saying, let's use the resources we have available to us to make this a successful game. And she, because that then turned into a relationship with Dove, she then blamed Sam for that, which I think is completely unjustified. That was your decision, Sadie. Nobody convinced you to get into a relationship with Dove. You chose that. And then the fact that Sam, people perceive Sam to be the mastermind behind Ichigo, once again, she could have gone with them on these tours around the country to promote the game and explain the game. And she chose not to. She said she didn't want to. And so Sam went, and Sam even tried to tell her, like, I think you should come with us. And she said, no, no, this is your thing. I don't want to do it. And then got mad at him for doing it and blamed him because people then perceived him to be the mastermind. But why would they think anything different when he's the one out there promoting it and talking about it and they don't know anything about her? And then finally, with the death of Marks, this is the most unjustified, in my opinion. If Sam had been there, he would have been killed. And it's horrible and it's a tragedy that Marks was killed, but that's not Sam's fault that he wasn't there. And who knows, if he had been there, maybe these shooters would have killed both of them, because I think Marks is the type of person that wouldn't have left Sam alone with these people anyway. Even in the scene itself, he sends all of the employees up to the roof to find safety, and he's the one that goes down and tries to talk to these people and de-escalate them on his own. So there's no way to say that even if Sam had been there, that she wouldn't have still lost Marks. She just blames him because these people were coming after Sam specifically, but that was their own misconception as well. So I have a big problem with this. And to me, this was all of these situations were very immature of Sadie. I think it shows a lot of a lack of self-reflection, a lack of critical thinking, and just a lack of accountability for her own actions in some of these situations, and then lack of accountability for just other people's actions. Sam is not always going to be the reason that things go wrong in your life, and you're giving him too much power. To me, she was trying to vilify Sam for no reason, when she was just upset with herself and the things in her life, and she needed somebody to blame, and for some reason she chose Sam.
Yeah, I agree. Sadie frustrated me so much. I don't like her as a character. I respect, the writing of her character. I think she's a complex character and she's a great complex character. But I don't like her personally. She frustrates me so much with her resentment of Sam and putting her blame on everything. First of all, for those kids coming, the shooter for coming at Marks, killing Marks, but looking for Sam, it was actually her decision, I believe, to put that into the game, that you have same-sex marriage for their coworkers. Not that that's something that would warrant anyone to kill somebody. That's horrific. But I'm just saying, she puts the blame on Sam for that. What was Sam to do? He was the victim in that situation, and she's sitting there blaming him. So that really annoyed me. The whole thing about her being jealous, like you said, about Ichigo, she had every right to go there and, promote the product that she made. She could have been standing in front and saying, yeah, I'm a female, I made this, or doing whatever she needed to do. But instead she took a step back, and she didn't want any part of the promotion factor. With her relationship with Dove, I mean, she just sat there once again, and did nothing to express herself and say, this is not what I want. This isn't a healthy relationship. You're toxic for me. Everything that she did, she just, she didn't stick up for herself in any way. And I mean, maybe this is just going back to things in her childhood, the way that she was brought up, and things going back to her depression. And I understand that, and I feel for her mental health issues. I do. But blaming Sam and putting all the blame onto one person for your actions or for the actions of others is just despicable, and that is something that definitely was the driving force in, as reflected in her, poor work ethics towards the end, and the deterioration of her friendship with him, for sure. So, there's a lot of things that she did that just frustrated me as a reader.
What do you think Sam and Sadie could have done to address these issues head on, rather than choosing not to address their concerns throughout the novel?
All they had to do was communicate, man. That's it. If she felt a certain way, talk to him. Don't avoid him. Don't just let it happen. If she has an issue with somebody treating her a way she doesn't like, going back to Dove, say something. Don't put yourself in that situation. It's not Sam's fault that you got back with him just because he wanted to see if maybe they could use a piece of his game. All she had to do was say, hey, I want to use a piece of your game. Is that cool? And he probably would have said, sure. but instead she felt like she had to be in a relationship with him and be miserable. No. And that's definitely not Sam's fault. So I think anything that they had, any issues that they had, it was just, again, that miscommunication trope, which I just don't like. But the miscommunication trope in there that, communication would solve so much where miscommunication is causing issue.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think, especially as long as these two individuals have known each other, they should have been able to communicate. The scene that sticks out in my mind that bothered me the most in Sadie's character and just in general in the novel, where I was starting to feel really frustrated, is when she finds the game that she had given Sam at the beginning of the book that she made for class, and she said, test this out. And it says something on there about her being in a relationship with Dove. There was like a note, I don't remember the exact details, but it was insinuated that they were in a relationship. And she says, well, he had to have known then, and that's why this is all his fault that I was in a relationship with him.
Ugh.
She chooses not to address it with him, but builds this resentment in her and really like a hatred towards Sam. And then when she shares these concerns with Marks tells her, well, actually, I'm the one that, Sam, because of his foot, wasn't getting up and getting things and putting them into the thing. I was the one doing that. So it's actually very realistic that Sam would not have seen this note, that he
Right.
wouldn't have been the one to do, like, it would have been me, not him. And she just completely disregards that information and says, well, no, he knew, it doesn't matter, he knew. And it just bothers me so much because all she had to do really was go to Sam and say, like, hey, when you played this game, did you see the note in there that said, it was from this person, or that
Yeah.
we were together? And if so, I wish you wouldn't have asked me to go and get the game from him. Or maybe we could have come to some agreement where we went together if she had communicated it to him at the time, where she could have said, hey, listen, I used to be in a relationship with this person. I was really heartbroken when we ended things. I don't feel comfortable going and asking for this game. Will you or Marks come with me? Because I could really use the support here. And instead, she just chooses time and time again not to express herself, not to communicate her feelings, her concerns, and then chooses to blame things externally. And Sam, I don't even know if Sam doesn't communicate that, I think he communicates better than Sadie. We certainly see him not communicating his feelings, but he does communicate with
Mhm.
her professionally. And after the death of Marks, we do see him really making an effort to try to communicate with her and saying, hey, we need to talk about this. And she just refuses. And so I think a lot of the issues between Sadie and Sam throughout their friendship, from the time that they were kids to the time that they are adults, could have been resolved if they had just spoken to one another and communicated like friends should.
Yes.
This even, I know you were concerned about this as well in the beginning of the book, where she is getting her community service hours for her bat mitzvah by visiting Sam at the hospital, which she started out with a friendship with him. And then it so happened that she would be able to get her community service done for doing that. So she kind of was like, oh, I'll kill two birds with one stone. I'll see my friend and I'll get my hours. So I don't really have to do community service. But when Sam directly confronts her about it and asks her about it, she lies. She doesn't
Right.
communicate with him. She doesn't explain the situation to him. And he gets very upset, which is understandable, where she could have just said once again, hey, yeah, I am getting community service hours for this, but listen, it didn't start until after we had already formed a friendship. This was just me kind of getting out of doing community service. I'm basically just hanging out with my friend for a few hours every day, and I get to use it for my hours, but it really has nothing to do with a fake friendship. It's just me kind of beating the system. And I think he would have understood that. I think he probably would have found that a little funny. But
Yeah.
instead, she lies to him. She's not honest. She doesn't communicate effectively. And they end up not talking for years because of it.
Yeah.
So it really, all of the issues in this book come down to a lack of communication.
Yep. She's deceptive with him instead of just being honest and upfront. She's even deceptive to her sister Alice. When, she tells Alice that she's, not really friends with him. She's basically using him, but that's not the case for the community service. She really does consider him a friend. She enjoys his company. And then Alice spills the beans later and basically says, oh, my sister asked her to fill out her timesheet or something. And I feel like had she had been open with her sister even and said, yes, I do consider this boy a friend, maybe her sister wouldn't have felt that way. Maybe her sister felt that he was being a burden or something, or she's jealous of the community service or whatever, not considering their friendship, that it was actually real. And once again, that goes back to the fantasy world, trope as well. But I feel like 100% lack of communication was their biggest issue throughout the entire session of their friendship, decade after decade, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, miscommunication and miscommunication and miscommunication even in the future. So and then another thing too that really annoyed me, or frustrated me rather, with her is that Dove was getting in her head saying, oh, he's not really your friend, oh, he's just your coworker, oh, he's not your friend. But they were friends. When Dove hurt her, he was there trying to get her out of bed. Just like later on when Marks dies and she's doesn't want to leave her house, he's there trying to get her out and go back into the world, the real world. And it's just sad that she moves to LA because Sam needs surgery on his foot and that's the better place for him. Basically Marks gives them each other, basically says, Sam needs you to move for Sadie and Sadie needs you to move for Sam, type of thing. And then once she finally does go there for him and he needs her more than ever to repay the favor of him always coming to her when she needs him. Once he gets his surgery, she says, oh, I'll be there as soon as you're out of surgery. And then she just doesn't show up because she has Dove in her head saying he's not your real friend. That was awful that was just horrible for a friendship. Clearly she wasn't his friend and he was hers.
Well, I think at that point is when she was feeling resentful towards him because she believed about him knowing that she and Dove were in a relationship prior. So this is where she actually said to herself, he's not my friend because a friend wouldn't have sent me to go get the game from Dove.
Right. But
that was
suck
her,
it up.
that was her thoughts though. That wasn't Dove's influence. That was her coming to that conclusion based on her misconception that Sam understood the relationship between Sadie and Dove and then intentionally sent her to get this game, not caring about her feelings.
Right. But suck it up because your friends, if you're a real friend, your friend had just had surgery on his foot. It was a very traumatic experience. The reason that he had to get the surgery, everything behind it, makes him who he is.
He had an amputation. It was an amputation.
Right.
Too.
He was amputated. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, she said, once you wake up, I'll be here. And then she just wasn't there. And that was so horrible and sad for Sam. And he didn't understand it. She never communicated why. She could have went there, made sure she was there for him while he was healing, and then maybe brought up this disc and said, hey, did you happen to see this? Did this happen? That would have resolved a lot of issues as well. But of course, that doesn't happen. And that's not who she is.
Yeah.
So after Sadie decides to leave Unfair Games, that's the name of their company that they made together, following the death of Marks and the birth of their child, her and Marks's child, she cuts off all communication with Sam and ultimately moves across the country to resume her life with her daughter. She begins playing a game called Pioneers that she later finds out was created by Sam specifically to try to reconnect with her. It's a game based off of a game that she had played when she was younger that she was really into. I forget the name of it. It was something Trail.
Yeah, Oregon Trail.
Oregon Trail, right. He tells her that he made this game for her. Do you think Sadie is justified in feeling upset by this?
Yes, I do actually. I thought that this was creepy. So he can't get in touch with her, which, regardless of the circumstances surrounding their lack of community, at this point, they haven't seen each other or spoken to each other in years since Marks's death. And she decided to leave the company and she intentionally goes away. She kind of has cut him off. She doesn't want any communication with him. And he develops a game knowing that she'll want to play it so that he can then reconnect with her. To me, this is creepy. I don't know. Maybe this is just me that feels that way. But I didn't think that this was a good way to go about this because then he also he pretends to be not himself. So he's playing a character in the game and he is communicating with her and they're talking and she thinks that she's building a friendship with this person. And then and then actually in the game, so he plays actually a couple characters in the game. One is like her best friend in the game, and the other one is another female that she ends up marrying in the game. And both, like, at this whole time she has no idea that it's him. And then he finally gives this reveal. She kind of figures it out, and he gives the reveal. And to think that you've been communicating with this person for, I think it was about a year or so, without knowing that it was them, but they knew it was you, it's creepy. I don't like
Yeah.
it. It's sneaky. And it does come down again to a lack of communication, because you guys can't just be honest with each other, like, hey, by the way, this is Sam. And you know what? If she doesn't want to have anything to do with you, whether it's justified or not, you shouldn't be forcing that upon her.
Yeah, this is when I started to get frustrated with Sam too. You know, that whole chapter, it was cool to read because the chapter made you feel like you were in a video game. The writing was great once again. But this is going back to the deception between the two of them. Like, can't they just be themselves? And I know that this is a book about a video game, and like technically when you're playing a video game, you're not yourself. So I get that, that theme, but it was reminiscent to me of, like, you ignoring somebody's phone call, let's say, and then that person blocks their number and calls you again, or changes their phone number, calls you from a different phone number or
Yeah.
something deceptive like that. That's like, well, you won't get in touch with me, so I have to try other means. But how creepy that he's doing this for however, they don't really specify how long, but it makes it seem like it might be months, maybe even a year or so. And you're feeling like you're engaging with other people and other characters, and then you just find out that deep down it's just somebody that you were ignoring for whatever reason. The reason is meaningless, basically, because, like Alex said, if that's your that's your choice. If Sadie didn't want to speak with him and didn't want to engage with him, that's her decision, and now she's being forced to, in a sneaky manner. And I just, this is really where I got frustrated with Sam, and I was like, this is desperate.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, if it was different means and he was still close with her, or he didn't try to deceive her pretending to be someone else and made this game to made this game for her, that would be sweet. But the way that it went about, it's creepy, like you said.
Yeah. They do specify, I think, that it was a minimum of a year that they were playing this game together. So
Which
it
is
was,
insane.
yeah, it was at least a year, maybe a little bit longer. But I mean, it's just, I don't like it. I think it's sneaky. And I so later on in the book, actually, Dove describes this to Sadie as Sam being romantic. So basically, Sadie is explaining to him the game and what happened and how she felt about it. And Sam says something, I mean, Dove says something along the lines of, oh, he's such a romantic, that Sam, that little guy. Do you agree that it's romantic?
So this goes back to him saying Sam's not really your friend. Sam's not really your friend. And maybe he sensed that Sam wanted more than a platonic friendship and he was jealous. And now this goes back to knowing that she's no longer in contact with him to admit that it's romantic, because he's the type that would do. We obviously don't agree with his, sexual kinks or whatever. We don't appreciate how he's a terrible boyfriend. So for him to see this as romantic, I think one, he's a creep in his own right. So I think him seeing this as romantic is because of that. But I think he's actually being honest and upfront and saying it's romantic because he knows maybe Sam had these feelings for her. So
Mhm.
maybe he's able to admit that to her now, in a sense, because now he no longer poses a threat.
Mhm. I don't think Dove was trying to be malicious. At this point in the novel, it's been years. They kind of like are reconnecting over lunch. This is where he's asking her to take over the job for
Right.
him.
He no longer
And
cares.
yeah, and I mean, I don't think he was ever really trying to put Sam down. In fact, he actually speaks highly of Sam at many points in the novel prior to this. He thinks he's a very smart individual, and he really appreciated his work on Ichigo. But I don't think Sam was a good friend, and I don't think there's anything wrong with Dove saying that. I don't think, obviously, I think this is creepy. I don't think it's romantic. I think Dove saying this, I understand how it can seem romantic, like, oh my god, he built a game for you, and then because he knew you would love it. That part, like you said,
Yeah, that's sweet.
it is romantic. It's him showing his appreciation and love for her in a way that she can understand, that he can express it and she can understand. It
Right.
was the way that he
Yeah,
then chose
deceiving
to,
her.
yeah, he then chose to interact with her, knowing that she didn't want to interact with him and doing it anyway without her knowing. That part I don't think is romantic. I think that's disrespectful. But,
Yeah.
the idea of making the game because he knew that it would be a game that she loved and she would need that, something like that in her life, it is romantic. It was more about how he then played in the game that I thought was creepy.
Yeah, and she had every right to be upset by the deception that he caused by
Yeah.
pretending to be who he wasn't. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
it completely defeats the whole purpose if it was supposed to be his way of being romantic. Because
Yeah.
it is a sweet gesture to make a game that, he knows she loved, but he did it just to try to reconnect with her. And he just didn't go about it the right way. And it just goes back to exactly how they never went about the right things with each other. Just the
Yeah.
lack of communication was always there.
Yeah.
So,
Also, I did like in this scene between Sadie and Dove where they kind of got closure with one another about their past. And she does say to him, you were a pretty shit boyfriend. And he's kind of like, yeah, you're not wrong. Like, I was a shit
yeah.
husband. I was a shit boyfriend. And it was actually, I thought, nice to see them having some honest and open communication in a mature way to kind of get past their history and just move forward now. And
Yes.
I liked seeing that as well.
Yeah, me too. So at the end of the novel, Sadie and Sam have actually reconnected following the death of his grandfather. Sadie's retired from the world of video game development, but teaches game development at MIT, where she's taken over for Dove's position. Sam continues to work in the video game development field, and it's suggested that it's possible they work together again in the future. So, do you think that they've found closure in their past experiences? Do you think they can effectively work together again, or that it's best if they maintain a friendship without exploring another professional relationship?
Yeah. I think that at this point in the novel, they have found closure. I think they've gotten over their concerns from the past, and now they're both in two healthy places in their lives. I don't think that they should work together again. Do I think they could yield good results? Yeah, probably. They probably could, but I don't think it would be helpful for either one of them mentally, emotionally. And I think that it's best if they just maybe maintain a friendship, can maintain communication, check in with each other. But I don't think that they should pursue another professional relationship.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. I think they definitely could yield good results. They've proven to do so in the past. But I think going forward, that they're two different people now. And I think it just goes to show that they were always in a toxic friendship. They're more
Yeah.
toxic together. So I think from that standpoint, I don't think it's healthy for them to regain friendship and perhaps just to contain their relationship strictly professional at this point. But they do leave it off. It does leave off in the book that they will be making more projects together. So, I wish
Well,
them success. If
no, they leave it kind of up in the air. So like Sam is basically like, "Hey, I'll make another game with you. I'll do it for the rest of my life. I would love to." And Sadie's like, "I don't think so, but here's my, you have my number. You know where I am now. Like
right.
maybe one day." But I think she knows at this stage in her life that she knows it's not in her best interest. It seems like she has done some work on her mental health, and probably because she now has a little girl that she has to take care of, and she has to be strong for her. She can't fall into a pit of depression again where
Yeah.
I'm sure that's a struggle for her, and I think she knows that getting back into this world of game development is not going to be beneficial to her mental health. And I don't think Sam is good for her mental health. Maybe at this point they've kind of grown as people. Maybe they can, you know, start to rekindle a friendship a little bit, but I don't know, working that closely together. I just don't think I think it's more harmful than beneficial at this point.
Yeah. I think Sam just would do anything to keep her in his life. And I think Sadie just looks at it like, look, I'm a mom now. Things are different for me. I
Yeah.
don't, I'm a teacher now, I
Mhm.
want to maybe uh, move past any toxicity. And I think,
Yeah.
that shows with her lunch and conversation with Dove that she's getting closure and she's moving past the toxicity. So that's the start of that. And then, Sam coming back, is just, of course, evident that he still wants her in his life. But I think, like you said, it's probably in her best interest if she doesn't engage in it.
Yeah. So it is suggested throughout the novel that Sam had feelings for Sadie that went beyond that of a friend or colleague. However, he never acted on those feelings, nor did he ever express those feelings to Sadie. We've discussed this. So,
Yeah.
what do you think might have changed in the novel had he been open and honest with her? And why do you think he wasn't?
I think he was afraid of rejection. I think she may have rejected him. And I
Hmm.
think it may have not only ruined their professional relationship, but their friendship as well. Although their friendship does get deteriorated and ruined from the lack of communication anyway. So it makes you wonder, were these two people meant to be friends as long as they have been friends? Um, you know, I feel like he wasn't really open with her because he was just afraid of being open, that she wouldn't see him the same way. And I don't think she ever did maybe see him that way. So he might have been better off not telling her, but also at what cost, because
Hmm.
it ate at him,
Yeah.
obviously. I mean, he made a whole game to try to get her to be in a fake relationship with him, like
Yeah.
it's weird.
Yeah.
Uh I feel for him. I do feel sorry for Sam in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
He lost his mother at a young age and he had Sadie who walked into his life right after. And I feel like he was holding on to her because maybe he was holding on to a female figure in his life.
Mm.
But it just, didn't work out that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you that he was scared. I definitely think he knew that she didn't reciprocate those feelings. I don't think she did either. I don't think she ever viewed Sam as anything more than a friend. Uh, so, I mean, I can understand why that would be scary. Maybe he was worried that it would change the dynamic of their professional relationship as well as their friendship. However, I do think if he had been honest with her, that it would have alleviated some of the building resentment that they both had for one another.
Mm,
And maybe they could have worked through it instead of just, anytime you bottle things in, it's going to explode at some point or it's going to
yes.
eat you alive. And you have to make a decision. Either you're going to, cut this out of your life or you're going to address it and try to move past it. And so I do think that he should have communicated with her, but I also understand why he didn't. If he had been open with her in the novel, I do think we would have seen less resentment. I think we would have maybe felt a little less frustrated as readers.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
so I think it might have been a little less of a frustrating read. And I think that their relationship would have uh, transcended those conflicts a little bit more easily. I think that they would have gotten through their hardships, more effectively than just choosing to keep everything in.
Yeah, I kind of like that he didn't tell her because it just goes to show the realisticness of the fact that there are people who are friends and one party does feel a different way. And there are people that exist like that and are afraid
Mhm.
to speak up or say anything for the fear of rejection. So, including a character like that and
Yeah.
including a situation like that, I think is another message that Gabrielle Zevin was just trying to get
Yeah.
across, and she does.
Absolutely. I mean, this is super realistic. I think most people have been in a situation like this at some point in their lives.
Yeah.
I know we both have.
Oh, yeah.
uh,
And I think the whole point too is that Gabrielle Zevin is saying, video games are a fantasy world, but the real world isn't.
yeah.
And things like these issues and these topics that she addresses in this novel show us that, the real world is the real world and not everything's a video game. So
Yeah.
I thought that was a great message from her,
Yeah.
which brings me to her writing style, which we like. This seems to be a correlation between the section titles and the relationship between Sam and Sadie during their specific times throughout their decades of friendship. So, what do you think of this decision by Gabrielle Zevin? And overall, what are your thoughts on her writing style?
So I love her writing style. I think that
Same.
she understands people and she writes really complex characters. They're realistic. The I've seen, reviews that people feel like these people aren't realistic. I disagree 100%. I think that these are very gray characters. You sometimes you like them, sometimes you hate them, and sometimes you agree with them, sometimes you disagree with them, and that's how life is. And
Yeah.
that's what makes a three-dimensional character. And I really appreciated the way that she wrote certain scenes. I really appreciated the way that she touched on topics in a very subtle way, but in a way that was still very impactful. The NPC chapter will just forever be one of my all-time favorite, you know, excerpts from a novel that I think is just stellar. I
Hmm.
don't think, I've never seen it done better at this point. I loved that. In terms of the chapter titles, I didn't really think anything of this at the time. So I know you brought this to my attention. I think it's clever if she was doing that intentionally to kind of break down the book into the chapters of Sam and Sadie's relationship and kind of giving it those titles. At the time, I just thought the titles are just like a name for what's happening at this point in the book. But it does kind of mirror the relationship between Sam and Sadie. Again, you brought that to my attention. So I think
Yeah.
that's just clever on her part.
Yeah. As her as a writer, like I would definitely read another of her books. I think that she's an amazing author. Uh, the fact that the section titles correlate with their relationships, I just think is so amazing. So during one section being called Both Sides, which was a game that we discussed earlier, but the section title being Both Sides is really about how they're on two different sides during this friendship, during this professional relationship. They don't agree on something. So every time that every time that Gabrielle Zevin is discussing them, she separates the discussion of each one individually rather than bringing them together. And I just thought that that was a really brilliant way to set that across.
Mm-hmm.
For the NPC chapter, brilliant again, like we said.
Yeah.
And it really puts you into the experience of someone who is dying. And it's just really crazy impactful to read. It really puts you there. And I got very emotional during that part. And I was so drawn into her writing. And then there's other sections too. Like there was a section called pivots where there's a pivot in their friendship. There's a section called marriage where there is marriages among the friends. There's a section too. Um, well, I think Unfair Games is the name of their company, but I think that was a section too, right? And Unfair Games is basically them two not communicating and playing unfair games with each other, so to speak, figuratively, to not, be good friends to one another or not to be on the same page. So I just thought it was very, very interesting. I loved that. um I just thought from a writing perspective that it was just really refreshing and brilliant to read. So I loved her writing style.
Yeah. All right. So what's your overall rating? Would you scoop or skip? And how many golden scoops would you give this book?
I'm conflicted about the scoop or skip. If it were me again, I would skip. But I would also recommend someone read this just because of the writing style. And if they love video games, if you love video games, or if you want to read a miscommunication trope about friends and see where this heads, even if you're not a video gamer yourself, it may be something you want to read. It definitely has amazing character arcs and character development in this book. Uh, it wasn't my favorite. And again, I don't know if I'm being unfair just because I came off of reading Fourth Wing, but it wasn't my favorite. I was bored most of the time. In between their friendship years, I feel like it was a little long. It could have been condensed more. I thought that it was creative in the fact that it was about video games and it was sort of uh, crafted like different levels of a video game, but friendship instead. And I just thought that was interesting. I loved all her topics and her messages, but maybe I would recommend it for those type of things if that's something that you're into. But for me personally, I would skip the second time around. I'm going to give it a 3.5. And I was going to give it a 3, but the writing style is what saves it for me here. I just think that her writing is just beautiful at times. Her writing is very creative, and I really appreciate that. But the characters annoyed me. I wasn't really particularly, connected to any of the characters. I kind of hated them all, to be honest. Yeah, they just frustrated me and annoyed me. Like, speak to each other. I hate miscommunication tropes. Like, it just annoys me to no ends. Like, I feel like it would have just alleviate a lot of issues, but then we wouldn't have had the book, so I see why they're there. But for me, I found issues on a personal level while reading it. It just, I don't know. Some things, like we said with the NPC chapter, like that saved it because we were bored. But like, why couldn't everything be like on that same level? I don't know. It wasn't for me.
Yeah. I gave this a 4.5. I think that I I would scoop this book. This isn't the type of book that you're going to reread. As I mentioned earlier, it's not a fun book to read, but it is very well done. And it does touch on a lot of very good topics. If you're expecting a really plot heavy book, or if you're looking for something that's going to be fast paced and a lot of action or something along those lines, this is not going to be the book for you. Definitely skip it. This is a character drama. This is a look at two people and what their lives are like, and how they come together and separate throughout their friendship. It's really a commentary on a lot of social issues, and it really talks, I think it really reflects a lot on the dynamics of a friendship. And I think that the characters are extremely realistic. I think that the scenarios that they were in were realistic. I wouldn't even consider this a game about not a game, a book about video games. This is really a book about people, and they happen to work in video games. So if you are hung up on the video game thing, it's really not about video games. It's about these people who make video games and what their lives are like and how they relate to each other. I think that the only reason I didn't give this book a 5 is because I did feel that it was a little too long. Somewhere in the middle, it felt very frustrating, and it just could have been shorter. Things could have been taken out. As I mentioned earlier, it was just a lot of the same. So, they're doing this thing together, there's a conflict, and then we just see that happening over and over again. And you can get the point across without having to see it as many times as we did. But aside from that, I think that this was a fantastic book, and I would recommend it. And I'd give it 4.5 golden scoops.
Wow. All right. Well, there you have it. See, I'd rather go play a video game than read this book again.
Yeah, I mean, I would not reread this book. This isn't the kind of book that you reread again. Really, the only books that you do reread over and over again are the ones with really good plots, because they're, they're in a different world, a fantasy, and you're like, oh, I want to get back into that and somewhere different. This isn't the kind of book that you're like, oh, I want to imagine what it's like to be in their life again. No, I don't want to be in their life
No,
again.
thank you.
Yeah, but I didn't particularly like the characters, but I don't have to like every character as long as they're well written. So,
Yes.
I'm happy to read about a character I don't like as long as I think that they are realistic, because sometimes I like to see, sometimes I like to read about different viewpoints or different, people doing things differently than I would have. As long as it's well done, I don't mind that.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? There are characters sometimes you just hate them, but you love to hate them. Like
Yeah,
Cersei.
I didn't feel that way
I
about
didn't
these
love to hate any of
characters.
them. I
Yeah.
hated to hate them.
Yeah, I just didn't like that. They're not the kind of people I would want to be friends with in real life,
Mm-mm.
and they didn't really, somebody like a Cersei, yeah, somebody you love to hate is because they're a great villain. And neither one of these were villains. They were just flawed people that I don't think I'd really want to spend a lot of time with in reality.
No, thank you. No, thank you. Okay, everyone. So before we go, we have the Sassy Spatch Award, or the Sassy Spatula Award to give out. The word was ostentatious, and the person who used it most was
No one.
yet again.
Once again, neither of us used the word of the day. We got to
Yeah.
be better. We got to be better.
Yeah. I mean, we're the ones teaching it to you guys, and we're not even using the own training over here. So, yeah, we failed, and we will do better. We
Yes.
promise, kind of, maybe, sort of.
No promises, but we'll try.
Hey listeners, stick around after this episode for some bonus content.
Next Tuesday, September 19th, we will be reading and reviewing Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. Join us then for our thoughts on the young adult romantasy, and join us again this Thursday, September 14th, for another party episode.
Woohoo! Don't forget to mark your calendar for our next Book of the Month episode, which will air on Wednesday, September 27th. We'll be reading and discussing Karen Slaughter's critically acclaimed thriller, Pretty Girls. If you haven't read the upcoming books but would like to, head on over to the link in our bio and get a copy for yourself so that you can participate in our discussion.
As an Amazon associate and member of other affiliate programs, we earn from qualifying purchases. You don't pay anything extra, but if you make a purchase using our link, we get a commission. So thank you for supporting us. We also want to remind everyone to be on the lookout for our live events on TikTok.
That's right. We're planning to do some live readings, book sprints, play some games, and other content. We hope you'll join us. For those, and in the future, we might even do a Make a Podcast with Us live, so you can join in with us on that. If you enjoy listening to our podcast, it would mean a lot to us if you would leave a positive review on Spotify, Apple, or the streaming service you use.
We would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye!
If you're just tuning in, this is what you can expect from our podcast. We're going to be releasing new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so be sure to check out our socials for updates and also some bonus content. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and other platforms. Click on the link in our bio for access to all of our socials, our website, and other links.
We encourage you to reach out to us with thoughts, ideas, questions, and feedback. You can email us at bookswithcooks@gmail.com. You can also find our full book reviews on Goodreads. These links will also be available at the link in bio. If no one told you today, you're important and valued. You belong here. You're doing great, and we believe in you.
Now let's turn the page and put a fork in it.
Because we're done with this one. So, first of all, let's tell you why we chose this book. What the hell was that?
I don't
What was that?
So, first of all, let me tell you why we chose this book.
All right. Before we get started, we want to stop. I can't even do it.
Before we get started, we want to tell everyone how Jess is sad.
Oh, you don't have mine in there.
It's right here. This is
No?
this is for the tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. I hate you.
Without further ado.
Without further ado, today's word of the day is
Discombobulate.
Spelled discombobulate.
Discombobulate. Spelled Discombobulate. Pronounced discombobulate. It's verb.
All right. Hold on. We need to redo this.